Things They Carried is a collection of short stories that follows the soldiers of Alpha Company during their deployment in the Quang Ngai region of Vietnam during the Vietnam War. In the introduction, each character is introduced through possessions. In the rising action, in Love, Tim O'Brien writes about the many stories that shifted his views about the war. In Spin, the narrator argues that not all war stories are tragic. In On the Rainy River, the narrator explains how he conforms to social expectations and decides to report for duty. In the stories Enemies and Friends, Lee Strunk and Dave Jensen overcome interpersonal conflict to forge an agreement. How to Tell a True War Story and The Dentist recount Kurt Lemon's short career as a soldier and his death. How to Tell a True War Story also reflects on how readers know a war story is true. Mitchell Sanders tells a story about Vietnam's landscape. In Sweetheart of the Song Trebong, Rat Kiley tells the story of Marianne Bell, a soldier's girlfriend who falls under the spell of the landscape. In Stockings and Church, Henry Dobbins relies on pantyhose he believes protect him from harm, and Kiowa and Norman Bowker discuss religion. The Man I Killed and Ambush offer two perspectives on the narrator's reaction to a young Vietnamese soldier killed by a grenade. In Style, Henry Dobbins takes Azar to task for mocking a girl who dances after her family is killed and her village destroyed. In the climax of the short story collection, the war becomes a nightmare. Speaking of courage, Notes and In the Field present the traumatic death of Kiowa, a blow to the platoon who loved him. In the falling action, the war causes feelings of vengeance and insanity. Good Form presents the idea of story truth. In Field Trip, the narrator and his daughter travel to Vietnam and visit the field where Kiowa died. In The Ghost Soldiers, the narrator exacts revenge on a medic. Nightlife sees Rat Kiley escape the war. In The Resolution, The Things They Carried ends with Lives of the Dead, in which the narrator explains that stories about the dead allow them to live again. None of the characters ever really escape the war. The soldiers of the Alpha Company platoon deployed during the Vietnam War are the central characters in the short story collection, The Things They Carried. The narrator is a fictional character based on author Tim O'Brien. When he's drafted, the narrator feels fearful and unprepared. During his deployment, he participates in and witnesses acts of violence and courage, loyalty and suspicion. In the years after the war, the narrator grapples with these experiences and shares his reflections. Norman Bowker offers a cautionary example of what happens when stories go untold. He keeps his stories to himself, though he needs to tell them, a choice that isolates him. It falls to the narrator to reveal how deeply Norman understood the courage required to cope after the war. Jimmy Cross is a college graduate thrust into the role of platoon leader. Thoughtful and imaginative, he takes his responsibilities to the platoon seriously and regrets every loss, searching himself for faults. Jimmy's loyal care of the soldiers motivates him to sacrifice his own needs and desires so that he can better protect them and bear their emotional burdens. Henry Dobbins is the platoon's machine gunner who wraps his girlfriend's pantyhose around his neck for protection during combat. Henry's a gentle man who believes in simplicity and directness and hard labor. He considers becoming a minister so he can live peacefully and serve others. Bob Rat Kiley is a storyteller whose wit can lighten troubled moments, but he's also deeply emotional and eventually sees so many broken bodies that he can no longer function as Alpha Company's medic. The men's reaction when Rat shoots himself in the foot shows their affection for him. Kiowa is a devout Baptist who loves life in its small details. He sleeps with the New Testament under his cheek, taking comfort in the aroma of leather and ink and paper and glue. Kind and patient, Kiowa serves as a mentor to the narrator in particular. Kiowa's death in the field of waste becomes emblematic of the waste of lives in war. Mitchell Sanders is central to many stories in The Things They Carried. Alpha Company's radio telephone operator, Mitchell is perceptive enough to know when fellow soldiers need support and honest enough to call out uncooperative behavior. Mitchell seeks the moral that every situation has to tell, serving as a wise voice amid the chaos of combat. What must be carried? The land, the man I killed, the rainy river, and the baby water buffalo are the central symbols in The Things They Carried. The Things They Carried points to the importance of what the men must carry during the war and afterward, when some soldiers find they cannot lay down the burdens of war. The men carry the physical objects that mean survival, but they carry intangibles too, emotions, memories, and responsibilities to each other, to their allies, and to history. The narrator says the soldiers carried the land itself, its jungles, rivers, fog, mountains, even sky. The land of Vietnam is more than a setting. It's another character in the war, and thus the stories, and it haunts the American soldiers. The whole country, Vietnam, the place talks. It truly talks. The land also takes on symbolic value, sometimes an enemy and other times a seductive force. The land can represent home or tomb, beauty or brutality. The land is so powerful that it consumes several of the characters. The man whom the narrator killed, in The Man I Killed, symbolizes the futility of war and the needless loss of life, and potential on both sides of the conflict. The qualities that the narrator imposes on the dead man are similar to the traits he uses to describe himself. It could have been the narrator, or any of his fellow soldiers. The Rainy River is where the narrator experiences his moral dilemma about running to Canada or reporting for duty. The name of the river connects the narrator's pre-war dilemma with the moral dilemma faced during the monsoon and the shelling that sucks Kiowa into the muck. The Rainy River comes to symbolize courage. In On the Rainy River, the narrator decides to go to war because he is a coward. He's too embarrassed not to go. Finally, the baby water buffalo is one of the book's most poignant symbols of the terrible effects of war on the soldiers. After the death of one of their fellow soldiers, Kurt Lemon, Rat Kiley projects his frustrations onto the innocent young animal, shooting it repeatedly in different parts of its body as the other soldiers look on. The baby water buffalo is symbolic of the innocence and youth of the soldiers themselves before they were confronted with the horrors of war that have torn them apart psychologically. Courage versus cowardice, love and responsibility, and storytelling are the key themes in The Things They Carried. What is and isn't courage? The theme of courage and cowardice appears in many war stories and movies. Often, courageous characters are held up as inspiring models, while characters whose actions are considered cowardly are criticized. But in The Things They Carried, courage and cowardice are more often interrelated and often arise from unexpected sources to produce unexpected results. War topples traditional definitions of courage and cowardice. Love and responsibility is a common theme in the stories and The Things They Carried. Various kinds of love, deferred, misdirected, selfless, or transcendent, weave through the soldiers' experiences at war and at home. The bond the men share as soldiers is a kind of love, as is friendship. Grief and empathy are also expressions of love. Love is particularly complicated when its goals clash with the responsibilities of war. In the field, the duty to survive may threaten patriotism or the love of country, or the challenges of leadership may eclipse romantic love. Love is rarely a simple matter in peacetime. For the young soldiers dealing with the often brutal responsibilities of war or with war's aftermath later in life, the competing demands of love cause internal conflict and often lead to painful decisions and actions they regret. Finally, there's the theme of storytelling. Stories are powerful tools in The Things They Carried. They help the narrator and other soldiers hold on to memories, deal with traumatic events, learn to forgive themselves and each other, and survive. For readers, they help deepen understanding and empathy for the soldiers and what they experience in wartime, and undermine cliches about war. The narrator argues that stories contain a specific kind of wisdom, story truth, which differs from a straight but accurate factual account of events. Stories help the storyteller grapple with painful memories and retain positive ones.